On today's episode of the Last Wire podcast, we're joined with Victor Echo 7 Foxtrot Sierra Romeo. Welcome to the show, Myles.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
Could you share a little bit about how you got involved with amateur radio and the name of the club that you currently belong to?
I got involved in amateur radio. It's a good question. Trying to think back how far now. 'Cause I should probably know this as a ham, right? But it's probably 15 or 20 years ago. I had no experience with ham radio. I just decided one day that it seemed interesting, and I knew a couple of people that were hams, so I self-studied and passed. And one of the things I guess I've always been a fairly strong believer in is supporting amateur radio organizations. So right off the hop, I joined the local ham club and joined Radio Amateurs of Canada, and I've been a member of both since. And currently, I serve as president of the Kamloops Amateur Radio Club, and I'm also an active public service line volunteer with Emergency Management BC here in British Columbia.
In 2017, wildfires displaced thousands of British Columbians on Canada's west coast, which burned more than 1.2 million hectares. More than 1,300 fires engulfed the province between April and November of that year. Many lost everything as communities were evacuated, often at a moment's notice. Myles, can you share with us the role that amateur radio played in helping these residents?
Sure, I can. I guess I'll just give a bit of a caveat saying my experience was limited to the Elephant Hill wildfire, which was just west of where I live in Kamloops, and I volunteer with with the Emergency Management BC, which is what is called the Central Provincial Regional Emergency Operations Center. We call it the PREOC. Emergency Management BC has a number of those scattered throughout the provinces. They're kind of the central regional control point, and so we have one here in Kamloops. And that summer, the Elephant Hill wildfire started near Ashcroft, near the Ashcroft Indian Reserve. And not too long after the fire started, I got a call from one of the managers at EMBC here in Kamloops saying that they had lost all communication with Ashcroft, to some extent with Cache Creek and with the Ashcroft Indian Band, and that the Ashcroft Indian Band was under evacuation. And could I come down to the PREOC and see what we could do as amateur radio volunteers? So that was how things started, John.
Now, this region of British Columbia, it's very mountainous, I presume. What were some of the challenges that you faced setting up this infrastructure to communicate with the different bands?
Yeah, I don't know, I guess for folks across Canada, how I would say it's probably more hilly. I guess depends where you come from. I mean, if you're in Saskatchewan, yes, you probably would say they're mountains, but around here, it's probably more hilly with, I would say, the at least around Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Bonaparte Indian Band area, your mountaintops are in the, probably 3 to 4,000 foot range, maybe the odd one a little higher. So kind of more rolly, dry, very dry hills, lots of sagebrush, ponderosa pine and stuff. So the what had happened from the fire is when the fire burned northwards, it took out the main fiber optic line in that area. So what happened was it was kind of a weird situation where within Ashcroft, the village of Ashcroft itself, you could pick up your telephone and make a phone call. You could send an email to somebody within Ashcroft, but you weren't able to get out of the Ashcroft area. And so similar, Cache Creek had some service out, but not south. So one of the things I was dispatched to do was, the need at the time was the Ashcroft Indian Band had been evacuated from their homes and their band office on reserve into the village of Ashcroft, and so they had wanted to set up a temporary emergency operations center so they could conduct their business and keep in touch with Emergency Management BC. So myself and another volunteer were sent out to Ashcroft to see what we could do in terms of setting up some communications back to Emergency Management BC. And when we left, all we really knew was that there was no phone and no internet service from Ashcroft back to out. So we had no idea when we left if we were going to be doing HF communication, trying to do VHF communication through local ham repeaters. We really didn't know, and so when we left, we actually didn't really take anything with us because the first trip was kind of I guess, a reconnaissance trip to kind of see, because we didn't even know at the time where the temporary emergency operations center was going to be. So we went out, and I must say it's really for listeners that haven't been through it, an active fire or where a fire has just burned through. It's a pretty wild experience. It's very strange, because there's, you're so used to having people around, and everyone's gone, and it's just, RCMP doing control checkpoints on the highway. So we got out to Ashcroft, of course, where it was normal life, other than they were hunkered down and um, had no communication with the outside world. And we looked at where the temporary EOC was located, and quickly kind of came to the conclusion that after talking with the EOC director and the chief and the band manager and stuff and what they needed to do, we came to the conclusion pretty quickly that although we could probably use our remote HF station and set up there and stuff, they really needed access to the internet, because so much of the communication between local governments and First Nations emergency operation centers and EMBC is done these days through telephone and email and data sharing and stuff. And so um, because the two of us that were sent out actually happened to have some microwave experience, we were standing on the roof of the building with binoculars, and we looked and we thought, hey, you know what? I'm pretty sure we could see the TELUS um, mobility site outside of Cache Creek. And so uh, we couldn't actually see it, but because there was a hill called Elephant Hill in the way, but we were pretty sure it was right on the right edge of the hill. Um, so we kind of formed our plan. We left Ashcroft, went back to Kamloops to the Preoc, and we grabbed up a bunch of gear, and we kind of brought everything. But our key plan was to see if we couldn't do microwave communication between the temporary OC and the TELUS mobility site. So um, that's what we ended up doing. We ended up, so in a sense, as I often tell people, it wasn't amateur radio, but it was still radio that came to basically save the day in a sense. Instead, in this case, it was basically microwaves using an LTE connection. And so we set up separate LTE connections for data and voice, and we were able to set up a complete network inside the temporary OC, so that everybody that had a laptop had internet connection. There was a number of voice over IP telephones and stuff there, and that's how that one worked out in the wildfires in 2017.
When you look at the communication network, was this something that the club had gear that they were able to utilize? Was there any planning in this that maybe we'd be utilizing the radio communication network through LTE, or was it something spontaneous that you guys on the fly said, "Hey, they need this. We can probably connect it." What planning went into setting this up?
Well, at that time, the Kamloops Club, we did not have currently the club actually has a high elevation broadband network that is able to provide backup emergency communications for some communities in the area. At the time in 2017, we had just started sort of thinking about that and getting it deployed. So it didn't extend as far west as Cache Creek and Ashcroft. And so one of the things that, as our work as communicators with the NBC, um, we have access to a wide range of information about, what infrastructure exists out there. So we were working very closely with, TELUS and Rogers and Bell and stuff to see, where their infrastructure was, what was still operating, what was operating on battery, what was operating on generator. And so we were able to work closely with the telcos to sort of, at that point, kind of figured out that yes, we had VHF communication that would work in terms of if that was what that was kind of what we were, the only thing we had. But by working with TELUS, we were able to figure out that we could work with them to create an LTE connection using their network from a site just above Cache Creek on Campbell Hill, kind of bend it around the corner, past Elephant Hill, which was, in the way of line of sight communication, and and then set up some LTE radios on the roof of the temporary EOC, and we were able to get a signal there and make that work. And so that's part of, I guess, And as I often say to people, as an amateur radio person, I'm more, I'm a communicator, and I guess I call it everything from, you often hear the hams joke about, we work from, DC to light or whatever, and I think that's a really good way of saying, the kind of the skills that you need to have as an effective communication person volunteering with an emergency organization is, you need to know everything from, hooking up a DC power supply to, how do you tie into a, fiber optic network. And, maybe not everybody has that same skill set, but, we have a variety of volunteers that, we have some hams that are really IT wizards, and they volunteer with us and they do IT type stuff. And it turns out the fellow, like I mentioned earlier, that had come up with me that day, he's actually a satellite technician as well as a ham. So he had a tremendous amount of experience working with, satellite communication and LTE communication. So he brought those skill sets to the table.
Now, from a future perspective and future proofing amateur radio clubs, how did this change what you guys put in your Go kits? Were you thinking long term from an LTE perspective and setting up these networks as being a priority, or when I look at most Go kits today, we see them as being a UHF radio, a simple antenna, an external power source. Uh, Has your group changed its vision on how it deals with emergencies?
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny you say that because, I actually found one in the basement of one of our club members. We were looking for something, and I found this little kind of looked like a plastic toolbox, and it turned out to be an older Go kit from the club, and it had, older ICOM 2 meter radio, a little tiny quarter wave mag mount, and and that was that was the Go kit back in the day. And now our Go kits include, we have, I guess, well, I guess for the average ham, what I would call expensive cellular modems, and you know SIM cards, and we have tripods and masts and a variety of different type of LTE antennas, and quad shield coax cable and stuff. And so yeah, that's now part, in addition to, we still have the VHF and UHF radios and HF radios. And with EMBC here in British Columbia, we use technology which is called MSAT, which uses a geostationary satellite, I don't know, something like 25,000 miles from the surface. Um, and it's great. It's a Canadian invention. It's awesome. It's great for voice communication. You can make telephone calls with it, but it doesn't do data. But that's one of the things in our Go kit, because we found that as long as you have line of sight to the sky, if everything else is kind of broken or doesn't work, you can use that. So yes, we've definitely added, interestingly enough, LTE stuff into our Go kits. And as I tell people, it's not amateur radio per se, but it's still radio. And a lot of the stuff that you need to know, for radio, it works, so like I say, especially with microwave stuff, it's line of sight. So, um, yeah, but yeah, it's now part of our Go kit. And I guess the other thing I'll add on top of that is coming out of the wildfires in 2017, sorry, is that it really spurred on the development. We work closely with a group out of the Lower Mainland, um, and called BC Warn, and they have, in the Lower Mainland, a very well developed and very effective amateur broadband network. And we started working with them around 2017, but really accelerated after that to start putting in what we call an amateur radio run backup broadband network. So it uses microwave links, goes from mountaintop to mountaintop, and allows us to provide backup high speed communication for communities like Cache Creek and Ashcroft, or Merritt, Logan Lake, those kind of places now.
Now, how does that? You describe that system as being a high-speed broadband through microwave. Is that something through your towers, through your repeater network, or what mechanisms are you using to set that up?
Some of the listeners might be familiar if they've read about, I believe in the Pacific Northwest, they use a system called Hamwarn, and some of my ham friends down in the Okanagan are part of the Hamwarn network. It's it's very similar in a sense. It's just slightly different technology, but complex um, concept is similar. We have it. The club here has a number of high elevation repeater sites where traditionally we've had VHF or UHF repeaters or both. We started back in around 2017 we started with just linking two of our key sites. Our backhaul, so we have a microwave backhaul that goes into Kamloops here, um, and then that backhaul goes to one of the nearby mountaintop sites, and then from there, we have a bunch of 5 gigahertz radios and dishes that basically go from mountaintop to mountaintop, and that provides a high-speed broadband network. Right now, when there's no emergencies, the club basically uses it for um, uh, monitoring our stuff. Our newest repeater is now done voice over IP using All-Star, so that broadband network has facilitated that. We have a voice over IP auto patch. But one of the reasons for doing this was to be able to, during an emergency, if for example, what happened in 2017, if the fiber is burned up into Cache Creek or Ashcroft, like happened in 2017, our network is independent, at least at the local level, from the telcos, right? So we're able to take, we use mostly Ubiquiti radios. We're able to take a Ubiquiti radio, stick it on a tripod at the EOC in Cache Creek, point it at the top of the hill, and it's then connected to our broadband network, which then backhauls out of Kamloops. So we've been slowly building that out. We have plans to expand that through the Thompson-Nicola Regional District this summer. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how it works. It's sort of twofold. It serves purposes for the radio club, but we also have it there available for local emergency operation centers or for EMBC should they need it.
Very fascinating technology, and I think when you look at the future of amateur radio and emergency communications, it is more than just UHF, VHF, HF. It's certainly a whole lot more when we look at options that are out there and available. And I think as amateur radio operators, we need to be familiar and aware of those options so that we can be very quick to reevaluate the need and then be able to adjust and accommodate.
hmm And I think, I know you and I talked about this before we started recording, but, I think for amateur radio operators, you really need a broad skill set. And I've seen it over the last decade where, everything from, 2 meter handhelds to, um, working in the IT cupboard is kind of your range of skill sets, right? Um, we've had cases where we've had people called out to basically, man road checkpoints, right? And they're using the local ham repeater, and when emergency personnel come through, that's where they check in because there's no other communication. And HF, we at Emergency Management BC have standardized on using the WinLink network, and that's very important and a key part of the plan here. In BC, we have we have mudslides and wildfires are kind of the small problems, and then we all prepare for the big earthquake on the coast, and so the WinLink network has become very important there. And so again, I think there's a place for everyone. Like if you're a keen HF operator, there's a role for you in passing health and welfare traffic, right? If you're a ham radio operator that works in an IT department, contact your local emergency organization because they can probably use your help. Because certainly when these emergencies get larger, we run out of enough people in the government organizations that we're always happy to have other folks with those skill sets.
Well, Myles, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you sharing the stories of the wildfire and how you overcome and adapted to these challenges. It's welcoming to hear that we're embracing new technologies and accommodating the needs of our citizens when they need us the most.
Yeah, thanks, John. If there's just one last thing I'll just say to ham operators that are listening, which is one of the key things I think that we bring to the table as communicators is our understanding of how things work is the ability to really provide sound advice to the decision makers in government because as I mentioned the example in 2017, nobody really knew what how to solve the problem. And it was the hams that went out and assessed and came back and sat down with the actual decision makers and said, okay, here's our recommendations. This is how you can effectively communicate. And I've seen that same thing happen in a number of different emergencies where, you know, the amateur radio volunteers were the ones that, you know, figured out that information, synthesized it, um, and then made the recommendations to the emergency managers to say, okay, this is what you can do. And I've seen cases where because of those recommendations from hams, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in costs have been saved in an emergency, and the communication has been much more effective. So I think that's something that oftentimes I think isn't recognized about us ham volunteers, is our ability to provide really sound advice to emergency managers.
Very true. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
You're most welcome.